100% energy actually. So cells need energy, and the only thing that can give it to them is ATP, or they can store the energy as ATP. They can, whenever the ATP is break down into ADP plus inorganic phosphate, we release some amount of energy, and that energy is drive the other reactions in the cell. So we all need energy, the cell need energy, and the energy is provided by this ATP, and that ATP is produced in mitochondria. So these are the energy production houses. So if we talk about a city, so if you talk about a cell as a city, the analogy of a city, then this mitochondria has to be the currency house or the production house of money. So we have a lot, we need a lot of mitochondria in a cell when we have lot of energy. For instance, example like that, in case of muscle cells, we have lot and lots of ATPs, and those cells are actually red. Why they are red? Because all the time enormous amount of blood is passing through there, because there's a high pressure out there, and their production of lot and lots of ATPs, because ATP is needed in those cells, because we need more and more energy in those muscle cells to do works perfectly. Okay, so that's why it's very, very important, because mitochondria also have a bi-layered membrane, and it has a structure like zigzag like structure. We call it the cristae because it has different crisps like our finger, and they also have their matrix, and in their matrix and the interspace between their double layer membrane, we have what is called extra space. That space is going to provide the workbench for production of ATP, because we have an enzyme in the inner membrane of mitochondria, and the name of that enzyme is ATP synthase. So the same enzyme that helps to produce glucose in photosynthesis is also present in mitochondria. It is called the ATP synthase, and this ATP synthase helps to produce ATP from ADP and inorganic phosphate. So in this mitochondria, the two layers of mitochondria, for example, if we look at the structure of mitochondria in a little here, so if we have this, so in case of mitochondria we have this two structures like this. We have this intermembrane space, and this intermembrane space is the outer membrane, this is the inner membrane. So we have intermembrane space. In this intermembrane space, in the inner membrane, we have this ATP synthase. So it's a molecular turbine machine actually. So we have this ATP synthase, we call it ATP synthase, and what happens, we are creating the proton gradients across this cell membrane. So we have this is called matrix. So we have a proton gradient over there. We have lots and lots of amount of proton in the intermembrane space. And what happens, we are creating this gradient. So we have a higher membrane of proton there, we have low membrane of proton inside this matrix, and that's eventually going to turn off. This proton has to be passed through down their concentration gradient towards the matrix, and whenever they pass down their concentration gradient toward the matrix, we have this ATP synthase, which actually have those ADPs and attach them with inorganic phosphate to make what is called ATP, which is the energy currency. So the production of energy in a cell, it is called cellular respiration. It's called cellular respiration. It's very, very important process to generate this ATP. We'll discuss this process in a whole detailed manner in a new chapter, in a different chapter, but this is an overview how and why. And mitochondria is very, very important. Okay, so after the mitochondria, we'll discuss about this organism. We call it the lysosome. So what the lysosome does, the lysosome has a specific types of functions. What are those functions? Because if we talk about lysozymes are actually sacs. The sacs filled with enzymes. What kind of enzymes? They are filled with hydrolytic enzymes. So whenever anything has to be degraded under the cell. So there are many byproducts, because all the times lots of chemical reaction is going on. As we know that whenever we're talking about chemical reactions, we're talking about byproducts, we're talking about bad products, which is these products have to be degraded very carefully, very quickly, and these are the key players which degrades those byproduct easily, because they contain those lysosome, those hydrolyzing enzymes. Those enzymes actually hydrolyze those byproducts by adding water and release those bad particles outside the cell. Okay, so it's very important. And not only they degrades those byproducts, but they can also degrade the whole cell if they burst anytime. Okay, so what is the necessity of bursting out a cell to make itself kill? It like a suicide, and what they like to do is suicides. So it's a bit of suicidal. Why they're gonna do this? Because many times when the cell is damaged, the cell is obsessed with a virus, the cell is obsessed with a type of malignancy, then the apoptosis has to be triggered. Apoptosis means the programmed cell death. So not only cell division is important for an organism to function properly, but also the cell death is very important. So in this case, these guys are one type of key players that helps the cell to be degraded, that helps the cell to be dead. So this lysosomes contains those hydrolytic enzymes, and when they burst out, those enzymes are released throughout the cell, and the cell is degraded. Cell is eventually gonna burst out, and everything is gonna finished like this part. So that's why this is another important. So it's a lysosomes, it's a sac of enzymes. Okay, and I think we covered all this important particles over there. Another important particle, if we look, so this is an animal cell, friends. So we will talk about the animal cell. So if we look at a plant cell, we have some different things in the plant cell. We'll discuss it later, but in the animal cell we have to discuss about another thing, and that thing is called the centrosomes. So what are centrosomes actually? The centrosomes are actually two drum-like structures which is having a very thick cytoplasm there outside. They do not have any membranes outside, so we can't call it the separate organelle, but they have this drum-shaped structure. We call them centrioles. We call it centrioles. So why these centrioles are important? Because the centrioles give a rise to something which is called the spindle, during cell division. It gives rise to spindle during cell division. So what is the spindle made up with? The spindle made up with the same type of protein which makes the cytoskeleton. So those proteins like actin, microtubule, so they are made up of proteins like tubulin and dynein and all these separate proteins. So we have this tubulin proteins or microfilament like structures which makes these centrioles, and those centrioles is gonna divide and make duplicate copy of itself during the cell division, and it is gonna make those spindles which actually have those beam like structures that gives the framework for a cell chromosome to be divided or separate properly. Okay, so they are very important during the cell division. They assure that the cell will have a proper amount of chromosome, and they will have a share of chromosomes in a perfect manner, and that's why the centrioles are important. Okay, but in plant cells we don't generally have those centrioles, but instead of those centrioles, the plant cell has other type of mechanism to derive the spindles, but the spindle production is very important in all the cases, whether we talk about a plant or talk about an animal cell like this. Okay, so let's talk about the plant cell now for a while. So we don't actually talk about the plant cell in a very much detailed structure, because plant cell has these organelles all. They have the mitochondria too, they have the lysosome too, they have Golgi bodies, they have nucleus, they have ribosomes, they have cytoskeleton which actually dividing the cytoplasm, and they have the cell membranes too. But what they differ in the structure is they have a rigid outer layer. The outermost layer, it is made up of cellulose, and that is called a cell wall, because as we know the wall is very strong and that can protect a housing. In this case too, that cell wall is very strong because they are made up of cellulose molecules. As we have studied the structure of cellulose, they are the simple glucose molecule organized together to form the long chain fibers, and those long chain fibers are attached by side reactions, hydrogen bondings, and van der Waals interactions to make those strong molecules, thread like molecules. Okay, and they also differ in their structure. We generally found in plant is a very large number of large volume area is covered with what we call a vacuole that contains the junk material, sometimes a material to be secreted, and sometimes a material that is not very much important, and all these things. But in plant cell we have those vacuoles, but they are very small in size. Those vacuoles may be degraded, these vacuoles may be sometimes secreted out, those vacuoles may be sometimes exocytosed and all these things. Okay, but in many cases in plant cell we have a huge amount of vacuoles. That's a characteristic of a plant cell. And a plant cell have another important organelle. That organ is called chloroplast. So the plant cell has this chloroplast. So, and what chloroplast actually does is the chloroplast has similar thing like this mitochondria, but instead of attaching ADP and inorganic phosphate to make ATP, it actually breaks down. Okay, so it actually used to make glucose. Okay, so it has to it is the place for the photosynthesis, which is a very important reaction in the field of biology. So when we talk about chloroplast, the chloroplast structure will be like this, and we have this small structures like this plates, we call it the grana, and you have a matrix too. The matrix is called stroma. So we have this grana, we have stroma here, and we have a membrane in the outer side. And what we have in this grana, we have chlorophyll. So we have chlorophyll which are green in color in the grana, and this chlorophyll are eventually going to produce the glucose molecule via the photosynthesis reaction. That's a distinct organelle in case of plant cells. Okay, so if we draw a structure of a plant cell, in many cases the plant cell has the hexagonal characteristic structure, but they can also have a circular structure, a square structure, and all this, or a tube like structure. So cells has a many variety of structures actually. So if we draw a structure like this, so that has to be a plant cell, for instance. So in this case we have this rigid cell wall. Another question arises, if we talk about the rigid cell wall, then if they have the cell wall, how can they transfer molecules with the nearby cells, or how can they communicate with each other? Because cell wall is so rigid, then it can't let things go and out. In this case we have cell membrane which is selectively permeable, which can allow some molecules to go out and pass through it, but in this case we don't have this. We have a cell membrane inside, but this cell wall is very rigid. So in this case we have small pores like this. We have other cells like this. If we draw cells like that, so other cells place structure in a structure like this. Okay, so we have other cell structure like this, and this helps them to be connected with each other. So we have small openings, and those openings is called plasmodesmata. So the exchange of the molecules throughout the cell wall is called plasmodesmata. Okay, so if we make the structure, they have nucleus too. So they have let me draw, they have nucleus too, but the most of the portion is covered by a presence of a large giant vacuole. So the vacuole may contain important substances, enzymes, or they may contain food particles for the future use, or they may contain the bad byproducts of it. So it is called a vacuole. That is a distinct feature of a plant cell, and it also contains this green color chloroplasts. So small chloroplasts like this. It's very important in plant cell. So those cells which contains this chloroplast are having those chlorophylls are autotrophs in nature. What do you mean by autotrophs? We mean that they can produce or synthesize their own food, and that is very important. Okay, and here we can also have those mitochondria too. So because mitochondria is needed in all the cells, because it is the structure where we can find those ATPs, when we can produce those ATPs. So it is very important. Okay, so this is the structure of plant and animal, the variety between the structures. So if you look at the structure, it is rigid, but the animal cell is not so rigid. The animal cell has a flexibility of different things to do different ways, but the plant cell do not have that. It has a rigid cell wall that prevents them to do this flexible works in their own poses. So this is overall the view of cell, and what we have as cell organelles, and we have as cell the function of those organelles to do things properly. Now if we talk about the shapes of cell, there are nothing can be more nothing can be more versatile than that will be, because the cells can be circular, the cells can be spiral, the cells can be oval, the cells can be cylindrical, the cells can be cuboidal, it can be square, it can be, all this type of cells can be found in cells. So we have a variety of cell shapes throughout our, so it can be star like shells. We have the star like cells, for instance we have example of you have neuron like this, we have a sac like cells, we have this nephrons. So we have lots of different types of cells will be there. So they arrange themselves, but not a matter why they're this shape, because they have these shapes for different purposes to do things in a specialized manners. So this is not something which comes from just from scratch to this type of diversity. We find this diversity via the evolution and that process of evolution throughout the course of time. So we have throughout the time, the course of evolution, we evolve to make different cells which can eventually performs differently, eventually performs things in very specialized ways. Then we can end up with something like that. So we have the star shaped cells like neurons, which is necessary for transducing signals from one place to another place. We have this cuboidal shaped cells. We have these finger shaped cells in to make the cellular to make actually absorb the nutrients and all this type of things. So we have this all this different shape of cells, and not only the different shape of cells, but the arrangement of themselves will also have different variety. So these variations give them a particular place on their own. So the cells for instance in our stomach will be different than the cells in our brain. So the brain cells are made in such a way that they can transfer that nerve impulse, but those cells that's present in our large intestine will made in such a way which can absorb lots and lots of nutrients. So they evolve like this to absorb lots of nutrients like that. So they has to have a huge surface area free to absorb those food products and to achieve them and to make ATP of it, or to make energy of it. Okay, and we has to have some cells, different types of cells in our muscles, because they has to have a large amount of this mitochondria to make ATPs when we need them. Okay, and we has to have some typical type of cells which are functioning autonomously all the time beyond our own we can say consciousness is heart. Okay, so we has to have different sets of cells in different regions of our body. So not a cell shape is important, but the arrangement of those cells is also very important. So we have to arrange those cells in such a way that can have a good function, a proper function. So if the arrangement of cell, you can't find a single arrangement of cell that is functioning less or functioning wrong. If we have different diseases, the cell shape or cell functioning is damaged because of the cell is damaged or cell structure is damaged. So whenever we are looking at an organism, we are looking at a pile of cells, a pile of different cells which are doing things differently, which are doing things in their own way, in their specialized way. And finally those coordination between those cellular organelles that is lead to form an whole organism. So we can find the coordination throughout the time. We can find it in the cellular level, we can find it in organ level, and we can find it in organization level or organ system level. So not only the organs are contributing with each other, like stomach, like like our alimentary canal, different parts like intestine and all these things are working properly with each other, but also different systems has to work with each other, cooperate with each other to make a body system, to make a whole body work properly. For example, we need to have the blood circulation system in the right place, we need to have the digestive system in the right place, we need to have the respiratory system in the right place to have a body function properly. And that's what a cell is all about, and that's what is the organization of cell, and that's an overview of cell. I think it's all helpful.